Hey there, sleepyhead. You're watching my official compilations channel. If you ever want to watch each video on their own, check out the main channel, Chat History. Okie doke, sweet dreams. Ridiculous jobs that no longer exist. In this day and age, we really take for granted just how quick and easy it is to be able to communicate. Back in the days of yore, not everyone was rolling around at the speed of sound. It could take several weeks to be able to relay critical information to your buddies, and a lot can change in just a few weeks. Nevertheless, delayed information was better than no information at all, and that's why highly trained long-distance messengers could make or break empires. First used thousands of years ago in ancient times, couriers were the best and fastest form of communication pretty much up until the invention of the telegraph in 1837. Sure, boats and trains made things a tad bit faster, but the principle was pretty much unchanged, physically transporting documents from point A to point B. The earliest and most sophisticated courier system of its time was that of the massive and girthy Achaemenid Empire, also known as, or at least considered to be, the First Persian Empire. They constructed the Angarium, a series of relay stations littered across the Royal Road, the main vein of the empire. This connected two major cities within the empire, Susa and Sardes. Can you deliver this message to Sardes? Yeah, no problem at all. Sardes, no. The Royal Road stretched across 1,700 miles of the empire's western half with patrolling guards and security stations at regular intervals, making it heavily secured. I mean, it kind of had to be. Messengers traveling down the road were carrying the orders from the Great King himself, so they were pretty important. Anyone severing or intercepting that line of communication could cause devastating effects. Also at regular intervals were checkpoints. These were relay stations that housed freshly charged horses as well as other messengers ready to pass things along down the line. This system of stations dropped delivery time from roughly 90 days on foot to just 7 to 9 days on horseback. But what if you didn't have horses? Well, we'd have to ask the Inca. Jump forward 2,000 years to the 1500s, and not much has changed in the ways of communication. In fact, one could argue that it was way worse. With no horses around, Incan runners instead relied on their piggies. Messengers of the king, called the chasquis, were slim, fit, and ready to rip, carrying messages across the vast mountainsides of the Inca Empire. Unlike their Persian counterparts, the Inca didn't carry the messages in their pockets, but rather their noggins. And that's because the Inca did not have any formal written language. Wild, right? Instead, apart from some complex numerical systems involving tied knots of string, everything was spoken, so a strong memory was the key to getting the right message across. The chasquis were tasked with relaying the king's orders to nearby provinces and military commanders. Tell the soldiers that they're doing a solid job and to keep up the great work. Yes, my king. The Inca, though, did rely on relay stations to always have a fresh pair of legs ready to deliver a message. According to Spanish chroniclers, that's a fun word to say, each station was about a half a league apart, but could be as far as a league and a half. That's over 5 miles, or for you metric fellas, over 832,000 centimeters. The stations were more or less weather-resistant small huts with other chasquis standing about, ready to get a move on. Upon arriving, the first messenger would give the oral performance for his buddies, and then repeat the message that he came with. After memorizing the information, the next chasqui sprinted up to 5 miles to the next station. Now keep in mind, this was the Inca Empire. It wasn't easily traversed flat road. It was pretty much uphill both ways, wobbly, cobbly stone roads 10,000 feet above sea level, on par with how our parents walk to and from school every day, or so they claim. The king said to slob his knob, and that Greg's a jerk. The fuck did I do? It's unfortunate that sometimes things get lost in translation, but remember the first rule of exchanging information. Never shoot the messenger. Leave it to the English to come up with some spooky dooky hocus pocus type stuff. If you're extremely poor and a social outcast with no lucrative or meaningful skills whatsoever, then the profession of sin eater might have been on the menu for you. Blimey. Historically, the job was performed throughout the early 17th century up until the 19th century, mostly in England, Scotland, and Wales. So just this area. As a sin eater, you were always on call for your services, as people have a tendency of kicking the bucket at any given time. So while you sat slapping mud around all day outside your thatched roof cottage, you could receive the news of a local death at the drop of a hat. Oh, he's dead. A relative or loved one would seek out your services almost immediately after the passing had passed. Once you were summoned, you'd pull up your britches and tween off screen to convene with the spiritually unclean. Arriving at the door, you politely knock before entering. You waddle inside to see your new customer and get to work. So your job as the local sin eater was to, as you could probably guess, eat the sins of the deceased, as praying and repentance apparently wasn't good enough. Now, the eating of the sins was of course symbolic in nature, but it was conducted in a literal fashion. The family of the dearly departed presented the sin eater with food, usually bread and beer. The food was placed on the chest or face of the individual right as they had passed away, supposedly sucking up all the bad juju as the soul floated to regions beyond. So, now with the food being properly seasoned with a pinch of immorality and a dash of transgression, it was time to chow down. The basic idea of the whole ceremony was that you would effectively absolve the dead of any wrongdoings committed in life, allowing them a clean slate departure for the heavens as a certified good boy. Now you're probably not surprised to learn that this was far from a Michelin star dining experience. The bread was all stale and the beer was warm with a bunch of gross floaties in it, perfect for the hipsters, but less than ideal for normal people. So after munching and crunching and glugging and chugging, you'd say a quick yet emotionally packed prayer. Rub-dub-dub, thanks for the grub. Yay, God. Where's the shitter? Now with a proper sense of closure, you'd receive your paltry fee and be promptly vacated from the premises. So while your work of purifying one's soul was well appreciated, you were looked down upon, even outcasted. The belief was that you'd retain all of these absorbed sins, polluting your own soul in the process. That being the case, sin eaters were forced to live reclusive and isolated lives, being hated, ridiculed, and shunned by the locals. Until it was time to deep throat a sin or 12. It's not exactly clear how the tradition of sin eating was started. Some believe that it derives from the Jewish tradition of the scapegoat, a literal goat that was imbued with all of the local sins and troubles, sent out into the wilderness and actively prodded off a cliff, taking all of the town's trials and tribulations with it. Atonement complete. Thanks, Mr. Goat. As for sin eating, it seems that the tradition was finally laid to rest in the beginning of the 20th century with the death of Richard Munslow, the last known sin eater in England. He reportedly was a humble and well-loved farmer who took on the job after the premature deaths of his children. Very sad. All in all, sin eating really was a self-sacrifice when you look at it, trading in any sense of social standing for a few pence. But hey, free bread and beer. If you thought your childhood was rough, imagine dipping, diving, ducking, and dodging your way through cannon fire while slugging a heavy sack of gunpowder on a ship in the middle of the ocean. That's what powder monkeys had to deal with almost on a daily basis. So while you may have been pissed at your mom for taking your Game Boy away for a few days, powder monkeys were grateful if they even saw tomorrow. Back during the Age of Sail, naval warfare was a pretty common occurrence, ships just blasting big metal balls at each other in hopes of sinking the other guy faster or causing enough damage to warrant a surrender. In order to give yourself a fighting chance, you needed a well-trained, well-supplied crew who knew their way around cannons. Besides ammunition, the cannons needed a propellant to send those cannonballs barreling at the faces of the enemy. That propellant, of course, was gunpowder. In the heat of battle, every trained sailor needed to man their stations and execute their responsibilities in order to have a decent shot at survival. But one responsibility that didn't need much training outside of carry this shit and run over there was that of supplying powder to the cannoneers. Since there wasn't much to the job description, the task was given to young boys, usually between the ages of 12 and 14. You see, back in this time, between the 16th and 19th centuries, people were just cranking out kids, especially the poor. Simultaneously, nature was just cranking out infectious and deadly diseases, and industry was cranking out fatal working conditions, both of which were promptly streamlining children into the orphanage pipeline. This, of course, caused orphanages to become overburdened, and they needed some relief. And where's the best place to put able-bodied youngsters just looking for any kind of future? The military, of course. European and eventually American navies were scooping up hundreds of impoverished chaps each year and dumping them on ships to take on the role of powder monkey, more often than not against their will. But the young lads were quicker, more agile, and physically smaller than their adult counterparts, making them perfect candidates for the job. During a battle, each boy would quickly carry at least 2 leather cases housing powder cartridges from the ship's powder magazine deep down in the hull, all the way up to the cannons. A dangerous job for sure, but a critical one for the success of the skirmish. Oi lad, bring me that very explosive powder, eh? And be quick about it.
Yes, sir. Right away, sir.
That's a good lad. In exchange, the young fellows were clothed, fed, and given beds, even a little bit of education to fill their heads. The plan was to have the boys eventually become official, full-time members of the Navy, assuming that they survived to adulthood. Yet despite the fact that they were a key part of the crew, they held no formal naval rank on the ships which they served. Now, while it was nice to have a place to call home, clothes on your back, and food in your belly, it of course came with the steep price of witnessing the horrors of war. Just to clarify, I said that powder monkeys were usually between the ages of 12 and 14, but in reality, some were much younger, with some documentation showing cases of children as young as 7 years old. These little guys were subjected to watching their fellow crewmen being blown to smithereens, impaled by split bits of ship, blinded by shrapnel, or having limbs ripped from rogue cannon fire. None of which they were immune to themselves, mind you. It wasn't until the end of the War of 1812 that formal regulations were put in place, preventing any recruitment of powder monkeys under the age of 12 from serving on ships in the United States. The British followed in suit with an age limit of 13 for the role, though these age restrictions were still often ignored. The practice did, however, fully die out in the mid-1800s once child labor laws were put in place and technology made the role obsolete. Sorry kids, looks like it's a big old box of PTSD for Christmas this year. Medieval medicine was wild. Physicians back then were really just throwing anything at the wall to see what stuck, which led to a bunch of strange medical practices that would, luckily, fall out of favor once modern medicine emerged. One such practice was that of uroscopy, the art and science of checking out your pee to determine your health. Now I know what you're thinking. Isn't this still used in the modern day? Yes, but no. Urinalysis, as it's practiced today, uses chemical, physical, and microscopic analysis of urine samples to generate quantitative data for diagnosis. Uroscopy, on the other hand, well, it had dudes snooping, sniffing, and sipping your pee. Well, Doc? I need a second opinion. Now, you might be surprised to know that the practice of uroscopy has been around for thousands and thousands of years. The earliest known evidence that historians have dates all the way back to the 4th millennium BC, where some ancient Sumerian physicians took note of urinary color. Perhaps the most profound early evidence that we have comes from the ancient Egyptians around 1550 BC. This is the Ebers Papyrus, a 65-foot-long medical scroll from ancient Egypt's New Kingdom era. This single document details over 800 diagnoses and remedies for all kinds of conditions ranging from skin problems, eye problems, burns, tumors, a limp, broken bones, backwards teeth, brown parasites, and of course, urinary conditions. The study and examination of urine continued for a while, but the formal occupation of uroscopist is believed to have been introduced between the 4th and 7th centuries in the Byzantine Empire, hitting its peak in the Middle Ages. According to medieval Welsh medical texts, it was believed that urine was the filtrate of the 4 humors: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. Of course, we now know that your pee is the product of your kidneys filtering your blood and excess water, but hey, medical science was still a baby back then. Because of this theory, uroscopists believed that urine was the end-all be-all for determining a person's health status, and thus, it was the most important substance to study. The most telling quality of the urine was its color, so after collecting a fresh sample, a real fresh sample, the color was immediately observed. But a problem with qualitative analysis is that it's completely subjective, whereas quantitative is objective. When it comes to subjectivity, one PP doctor may interpret the same color differently than another. For objectivity, numbers are numbers, there's no argument there. In order to mitigate subjectivity and establish some sort of consistency, the piss percipients often constructed quick reference guides to use as a standard for diagnosis, sharing their knowledge across heavily detailed manuscripts. As an example, if your urine was clear, you might have some spleen issues. If it was dark red, your liver's too hot. Green, you've got jaundice. Black, well, wait, is black urine a thing? Oh. Oh God. Yeah, I don't think you're gonna be doing too well if you're inking out your dink. While you had the visual aspect, Euroscopists also ventured down the avenues of smell and taste to solidify the reasonings if a diagnosis couldn't be immediately deciphered from color alone. Urine that tasted sweet was evidence of diabetes, whereas stinky pee-pee usually meant infection. Now, while this may seem silly looking at it through a modern lens, there was some validity to the practice. Euroscopists were able to properly diagnose conditions like diabetes and jaundice through their practices. Diagnosis was great and all, but without proper and effective treatment, you're not going to be making much progress, except just being closer to the grave. It's like if someone tells you, hey, your car is broken, and then proceeds to offer no meaningful solution. At that point, they're just taking the piss. The ultra wealthy really love spending their money on stupid shit. They love it, in fact. When you've got more money than you could spend in 50 lifetimes, why not? Dumping the most expensive champagne on luxury watches, a fifth mansion on the beach, rigging elections, whatever tickles their sacks. But ostentatious spending is nothing new. You see, back in the 1700s, wealthy estate owners in England, Ireland, and Scotland were bored out of their skulls. I mean, think about it. The extent of dopamine rushes back then were what? Attending yet another opulent ball, hunting some wildlife, racing a horse or two, then putting them down when they don't win. And when you felt like a real degenerate, you had excessive gambling. But these frivolous activities got stale real quick. There needed to be something fresh, something grand, something right in your own backyard. That's when the idea of the English landscape gardens started to bloom, transforming sprawling grounds of estates into picturesque and serene scenes. Replacing the clear-cut and formal gardens of their French counterparts, English landscapes were to appear engineered by nature itself, with natural slopes, ponds, groupings of trees and flowers, a nice boulder or two, and organic decoration. These established wonderful getaways for owners and guests alike to retreat and get in touch with nature. But for some, all the stone and trees and grass just wasn't cutting it. Something was missing, something human, like a person. Believe it or not, some wealthy fellas sought out to hire real-life people as decorations for their gardens. Take, for example, one Joseph Pocklington. Born into a wealthy banking family and receiving his inheritance at just 26 years old, his priority was to just spend the shit out of it. After all, what's the point of having money if you don't spend it? As my dad always tells me, you only live once, son. Enjoy it. Well, Mr. Pocklington over here made damn sure he was going to enjoy the life he was given. After purchasing his own private island on a lake, he commissioned the construction of his own armed fortress, a druid temple, and several natural grottos. In order to make the estate seem more lively, he advertised employment for a man to live in his garden, demanding that the man, quote, live for 7 years without washing or cutting his hair or nails. The man was to never speak or interact with any guests and would spend his lonely days in an artificial cave. The basic idea was for guests to observe a man in his most natural state, untouched by societal influence. If the man was able to carry out these conditions, he would be paid the equivalent of about $100,000 in today's money. Now that's spread over the whole 7 years, so it's not really that much. But the position was dubbed the Ornamental Garden Hermit. Now get this, Pocklington was not the only fella to come up with this idea. Others employed their own hermits with much more lenient rules. Perhaps the most well-known example was the Hill family from Shropshire. Their botanical bro was dubbed Father Francis, and he fully interacted with guests, told stories, and dispensed his own wisdom, all while maintaining a mysterious yet comforting presence.
I want to see the hermit, mummy. I want to see the hermit.
The trend of the ornamental garden hermit lasted just over a century, finally being uprooted in the 1830s in favor of living statues. And to answer your question, no, garden gnomes were not inspired by the garden hermit. Those came from Germanic folklore, hundreds of years prior, but they'll still guard your garden as best they can. History's most one-sided wars. There's that quote about all being fair in love and war, but I don't think that someone swanging their sword at an Ordnance BL 5-inch howitzer artillery cannon would find it very fair. Well, that's pretty much what happened during the Battle of Omdurman. Now, if you're familiar with African history around the turn of the 20th century, you know that it was nothing short of a shit show. European powers were grabbing anything and everything they could get their hands on to see what natural resources could be tapped into. As for the British, one of their more tactical moves was seizing control of the Egyptian territory from the Ottoman Empire in the late 1880s. Why Egypt? Well, because Egypt has the Suez Canal, basically a super sweet shortcut connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, and thus the Indian Ocean. Guess who owned India at the time? Also the British. So instead of slogging the freshly plundered raw materials all the way around the scenic circumference of Africa, merchants could just speedrun that shit through the Suez, potentially saving months of sailing. Now, with the seizure of Egypt came a bit of a bonus, some territory to the south, known as Sudan, but it came with some baggage of its own. If Egypt were to be the crisp, clean shirt in the deal, Sudan was going to be the pants. And these pants were about to be shat. So while the British now controlled Sudan on paper, it wasn't really the case in reality, at least not yet. Throwing even more chaos into the mix were the not-so-modest Mahdists, an independent Islamic group that rose up and rebelled against their Ottoman Egyptian oppressors, establishing their own state in the Sudanese territory back when the Ottomans controlled the region just a decade earlier. They didn't give a flying flip that the British were now the technical rulers of the land. Oppressors were oppressors. As a matter of fact, they were feeling a bit big in the britches after just toppling the Ottoman control, so they were eager to start round two. The British, though, initially wanted to abandon Sudan, declaring it too much of a political and financial burden to deal with, what with all the squabbling and whatnot. They would instead leave the Mahdists to have their own land and not intervene. However, continued Mahdist aggression led to the death of one Charles Gordon, a renowned British general who was tasked with evacuating civilians from the Sudanese spit-sounding capital city of Khartoum. Mahdist soldiers slaughtered around 10,000 innocent civilians in the wake of Charles's assassination. This single act switched British opinion from indifference to vowing vengeance. Thus, in 1896, the British began the Anglo-Egyptian conquest of Sudan. This war lasted about 3 years, with British forces steamrolling the Mahdists in virtually every encounter. Well, if it's so one-sided, why did it take 3 years? Good question. This was actually by design. You see, the British were slowly advancing into Sudan, building a supply railroad behind them the whole way so as to not have supplies run dry and be caught with their pants down, an issue that had previously plagued the British in the past. The conquest culminated in the Battle of Omdurman on September 2nd, 1898. Oof, just lasting a single day, huh? Talk about foreboding. Yeah, so this battle wasn't so much of a battle as it was a full-blown massacre. Here's where the one-sidedness kicks in. About 26,000 British and Egyptian troops faced off against over 50,000 Sudanese warriors. Seems like a slam dunk for Sudan, but sheer size is no match for optimal equipment. Remember that supply railway I just mentioned? Well, it supplied the British front lines with 17,000 rolling block rifles, 8,000 bolt-action rifles, 44 artillery cannons, and 40 state-of-the-art water-cooled Maxim automatic machine guns. Oh yeah, there was also a handful of naval gunboats ready to tear shit up from the banks of the Nile. The Mahdists, well, you know, they tried. They had several thousand firearms seized from previous battles, as well as a few dozen artillery, but yeah, they were either poorly maintained or those operating them were poorly trained. The unlucky fellas not equipped with firearms instead brandished the old reliable sword and shield, and it went just about as well as you'd think. The Mahdists were completely and utterly destroyed. According to 23-year-old British Lieutenant Winston Churchill, yes, that Winston Churchill, approximately 11,000 Mahdist soldiers lay dead, 16,000 wounded, and over 4,000 captured. The rest either surrendered or just fled. As for the British, less than 50 soldiers were killed in battle, a testament to the sheer imbalance of weapons technology and tactical warfare. After the battle, the Mahdist state was effectively dismantled, cementing British dominance in Sudan. Sometimes wars can be won without inflicting any real damage. You just have to be well versed in the art of intimidation. Even if you're a tiny pushover, you can still get your way if you make yourself seem scary enough. The Kettle War is a prime example of this tactic. At the end of the 80 Years' War back in 1648, the Dutch gained independence from the Spanish. In addition to establishing their own little republic within the Netherlands, the Dutch had full access to a gaping mouth, the mouth of the Scheldt River. This was a critical trade route for many cities just south of the newly formed republic, cities that were still under smelly Spanish control. So the Dutch took advantage of the situation. Oh yeah, time to close the river. The Dutch cut off all trade access through the Scheldt, completely crippling the economies of the downstream cities. Instead, trade was diverted through the Dutch ports of Amsterdam and Rotterdam, allowing them to flourish into dominant trade hubs. The funny thing though, nothing would be done about it for 136 years. But in the late 1700s, there was a new sheriff in town for the Holy Roman Empire, Joseph II, and he did not like the Dutch doing what they were doing. As a rather ambitious reformer, he was aiming to make his empire the main political and economic power in Europe, but the whole closure of the Scheldt thing was a big old turd in the punch bowl of his plans, so he needed to act, and act he did. Having just gotten their strength kicked in by the British during the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War in 1784, Joseph II decided to take advantage of a now weakened Dutch republic. The demand was simple: open up the river or go to war. Now, when your territory is like this and another territory threatening you looks like this, it might be best to just let them have this one. In reality, however, the Holy Roman Empire's army was fairly scattered across the mainland, being particularly small and ill-equipped near the Netherlands, so the immediate threat was minimal at best. As a show of force though, and to keep up the illusion of strength, Joseph sent out a small squadron of 3 naval warships, led by the heavily armed, no-nonsense heaven flagship Le Louis. The ships were sent to the mouth of the Scheldt to sit there and look intimidating. The Dutch, however, called the empire out on their bluff. On October 9th, 1784, they intercepted the 3 opposing warships with one of their own, the Dolphin, and it was looking to blow some holes into other ships. In an act of intimidation of their own, the Dolphin fired a single warning shot towards Le Louis.
A soup in the morning, a soup at night, a soup every day makes me feel right.
Oh man, now I'm
super depressed.
The warning shot from the Dolphin whizzed through the galley of Le Louis, causing the casualty of a single soup kettle. Hilariously, the crew of Le Louis surrendered immediately, chalking up a victory for the Dutch Republic with a single cannon shot. Joseph II, not to be embarrassed, declared full-on war, but no violence ever came of it. Instead, both agreed to negotiate. The result? The Scheldt remained closed, but the Dutch would compensate the Holy Roman Empire a hefty sum for the inconvenience. Around 2 to 10 million Dutch guilder, or roughly $120 to $600 million in today's money. I'd say that compensates for the soup. My soup. War and drugs is a pretty solid combination, but when said substances are used in warfare, it becomes a whole other matter entirely. Let's touch back on the early 1800s. Despite being halfway around the world, the British Empire still commanded trade in the Indian Ocean, even stretching into the Pacific, with one of their main suppliers being Imperial China. The Qing dynasty was doling out all kinds of goods to the Brits, including earthy herbs, soft silks, precious porcelain, and the iconic British life fuel, tea. While this trade was good for the British consumer, the rather one-sided trade imbalance left British merchants a tad miffed. The British Empire was absolutely hemorrhaging silver to pay for all of the goods with no reciprocity. The Chinese simply had little to no interest in British goods like wool or cotton. And that was a problem as British silver reserves were drying up, putting a damper on the liquidity of trade in the region. So what do you do if there's no demand? You force it. The British began secretly exporting Indian-grown opium into Chinese ports. Smugglers paid for the opium with silver, which then paid for more Chinese goods, completing a more sustainable trade loop. British merchants were happy, Chinese smugglers were happy, the majority of the Chinese population were suffering crippling addiction. You know how it goes. So yeah, it's no surprise that opium demand soon turned exponential. From 1797 to 1833, opium imports soared from 680,000 pounds a year to over 5.1 million pounds a year. I mean, it was a silver gold mine. Even American merchants got in on the action, selling Turkish opium to China. But this started to tip the scales too far in the other direction, now with the Chinese silver reserves reaching unsustainable levels, not to mention the effects on the general population. Before, the average British consumer was just sipping their Chinese tea from ornate porcelain cups while relaxing in their comfy silk robes. Now, the average Chinese consumer was struggling to detach themselves from their pipe. Although the Chinese emperor had outright banned opium usage, it didn't stop the average fella from getting their fix. Millions upon millions were addicted, leading to a drastic decline in productive laborers, merchants, farmers, and teachers. Well, in 1839, the Chinese emperor put his silky slippered foot down. Severe punishments were put in place for anyone dabbling in deals of opium. All imports of the stuff were seized and destroyed. Famously, the kickstart of the Opium War was the seizure and destruction of over 2.9 million pounds of opium in one go. The British were not pleased with getting shafted out of payment for the product, so they demanded reparations. At cannon point. Just a year later in 1840, a British naval fleet positioned itself off of China's eastern coast and began bringing the heat, bullying various islands into submission as to establish a base of operations. Let's take a look at the roster for both sides. The British in this campaign commanded over 19,000 soldiers and 37 ships. Standing in China's corner, though, was an estimated 100,000 mobilized infantry. China had the numbers, but Britain had the technology. Chinese fortresses? Demolished. Resistance groups? Destroyed. Innocent civilian generational homesteads? Deleted. Campaigning up the Pearl River, the British blasted their way to the Chinese commercial heart of Canton, still hell-bent on getting their compensation. Sir, the British are here. Both parties sat down at a pretty cool looking table and agreed to peace terms. But the overarching powers in charge, mainly the Qing Emperor and the British Foreign Secretary, refused said terms, prompting the supersaturated British to withdraw from the Pearl and shoot up the Yangtze River to clog any and all economic arteries. This forced China to renegotiate the peace conditions, resulting in the drafting of the Treaty of Nanjing in 1842. As a result, opium usage remained illegal, but new trade ports would be open to British imports, which, hilariously enough, was still royal shit tons of opium. The island of Hong Kong was ceded to the British as a colony, and China was forced to pay nearly 26 million silver dollars in reparations to the British. This comes out to roughly $830 million in purchasing power, or roughly $1.3 billion in silver value alone. Now, there was a second opium war a few decades later, but just like a bunch of farmers winning 2 donkey auctions, the Chinese got their asses handed to them a second time. This one's a classic. Now, I briefly ran through this one in my History Facts You Wouldn't Believe Are True video, but let's revisit it with a deeper understanding and some better artwork. The Anglo-Zanzibar War holds the record as the shortest war in known human history, lasting just 38 minutes. I mean, your commute home is probably longer than that.
You're listening to D101 The Shaft. All other radio stations can suck a dick.
The reasoning behind the war was very simple. By the end of the 1800s, Zanzibar was a major trade hub off the eastern coast of Africa. Whoever controlled it had massive influence in the region's exchange of goods, including spices, ivory, and the frequent slave or two, including all profits that go with it. With European powers scrambling for Africa, Britain needed to cement its ability to control trade, hence the discussion about it taking Egypt in the first chapter. But Zanzibar was also unethically up for grabs. A treaty was signed in 1890, and the nation of Zanzibar, while remaining independent, became a British protectorate, meaning that the British technically held power over Zanzibar, but it could self-govern with guaranteed British protection should things go awry. On August 25, 1896, the British Empire's favorite sultan, along with his esteemed beard, received a sudden and premature ticket to paradise. Some believe he may or may not have been poisoned, but no proof has ever surfaced to support that claim. What's suspicious, though, is that the Sultan's less impressive facial hair having cousin, Khalid bin Bargash, decided to claim the throne for himself while the previous Sultan's body was still warm. Oh, and fun fact, this same guy lost out on the throne just 3 years prior. Highly suspicious, one might say, fingering their mustache. Unfortunately for Khalid, only a British-approved Sultan could sit on the throne. Unfortunately for the British, he didn't give a fuck. In case you didn't know, the name Khalid in Arabic means immortal or everlasting, a name that was about to be put to the test using multiple British gunboats just strapped to the tits with cannons and machine guns. On August 26th, the very next day after the Sultan had just died, Khalid was given an ultimatum: surrender by 9 AM the next morning or be converted into a fine red mist. Khalid refused, not believing that the British had the balls to actually do anything about it. As a precaution, he had assembled a small army of his own, including a few outdated cannons and guns, but the comparison of firepower was laughable. Multiple warnings were given to the usurper the next morning, up until an hour before the deadline. However, the warnings fell on deaf ears. The clock struck the hour, 9 a.m. The air was still with a deafening silence so quiet, you could hear a subscribe button click. The order was given. The gunboats unleashed their volleys on the Sultan's palace for 38 minutes. Suffice to say, it was completely destroyed. After the guns fell silent, over 500 men and women, mostly innocent civilians, lay dead. The British suffered only one injury, a simple splinter from flying debris. As for Khalid, he snuck off into hiding but was eventually captured and exiled. That afternoon, the British placed a new approved sultan in place, and within a few weeks, a new palace was built. A happy ending for most. This episode of Chat History is called Emu War. Listen, I know the subject has been beaten to death worse than a wife at an alcoholics convention, but now it's my turn. Back in 1932, the inverted hellhole that is Australia had one heck of a problem. After the Great War, returning veterans needed something to help them cope with the fact that they just lived through the most traumatic event of their lives. So far. In order to supply such a remedy, the Australian government encouraged returning veterans to settle on remote farmland out west. This relaxing, freeing, open-air experience hypothetically would do the mind and body good for the recovering war heroes. But with a lack of farming experience and putting said low-level farmers in less than ideal agricultural conditions, it became way more of a burden than a life of leisure. Oh yeah, and that Great Depression thing was going on. What, you thought that was just a United States thing? No. It was a worldwide catastrophe. To throw even more salt in the wound, wheat prices were taking a pounding. So not only was it a pain to grow, but yielding any wheat, ironically enough, wasn't netting much bread. But then comes the main villain of the story. With environmental, mental, and financial odds stacked against them, the Aussies faced one more foe. The dreaded emu. Bleh. Actually, it was more like 20,000 emus. A massive mob of the flightless birds had migrated from more central regions of the outback towards the west in search of cooler temperatures and more fruitful areas for public mastication. Unfortunately for the aspiring farmers, such a source of sustenance was their main cash crop, the wheat. The emus swarmed the farmlands, consuming everything in their wake, so the farmers phoned the government. Oi, government! These right cunts are eating on me crops! The news spread quickly, making it all the way up to the Minister of Defense, who approved a military intervention to deal with the pest problem. The solution? A few lead pills administered through an ergonomic dispenser. They were gonna shoot them. Deployed onto the field were 2 Lewis light machine guns with approximately 10,000 rounds and a military vehicle for mobility. The basic idea was to scare off the flocks and send them back where they came from, or at least somewhere that wasn't farmland. But things of course didn't go according to plan. To make up for the fact that they're flightless, emus are extreme sprinters, capable of topping out at around 30 miles an hour. Also keep in mind that emus can stand as tall as 6.5 feet and weigh over 130 pounds, so these feathered balls of rage were no pushovers. Righto, let's open her up. The emus were slippery little devils, able to weave in and out of the gunfire pretty effectively. They ran around all over the place, tearing up crops in the process. But the real kick in the dick here is that they refused to relocate away from their newfound food source. After a few weeks, only a few hundred emus were slain, barely a dent in the total population. So the government tried again, improving ambush tactics and rallying locals to help out. They were way more successful, bringing the kill count to about 1,000. Still only about 5% of the estimated population. The Australian government threw in the towel, with the public deeming the operation a waste of government resources amidst a global economic crisis. Despite staring down the barrel of a machine gun, the emus were declared the victors. For now. In addition to erecting more effective fencing, the government turned to the everyday citizen for help, providing free or subsidized ammo for some good old-fashioned giant bird hunting. Within just 6 months, over 50,000 bounties had been claimed and paid out, and over the next few decades, this number grew to nearly 300,000. Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. Embarrassing royal deaths. Part 3. This noble set of nostrils is none other than Charles VIII, the only surviving son of French King Fela, Louis XI. The year is 1483, and thanks to a generous inheritance from his dad's cold corpse, he is now the new French King Fela of France at the angsty age of just 13. But since teenagers aren't the most qualified to rule entire kingdoms, his 22-year-old sister, Anne, took the reins as head of the kingdom until Charles came of age. God, these artists were mean. Now, to her credit, Anne was a pretty solid ruler in her own right, keeping the Kingdom of France afloat for 8 years until Charles's 21st birthday in 1491. She was able to stomp out rebellious nobles and maintain strong royal authority. But now, it was the super schnoz himself up to bat. His first major strategy as King of France was to sign all kinds of peace treaties to make extra super sure that no one was going to invade. After all, the 100 Years' War just ended not that long ago, so he kinda needed some peace of mind. So for a little while, Charles remained on the defensive, until it was time to not do that. If you know geography, you know that just a croissant's throw to the southeast is the Italian peninsula, full of Italians. Around this time, the region consisted of a whole mishmash of kingdoms and republics, with the biggest bit of the boot being the Kingdom of Naples, headed by one King Ferdinand I. He was a dick. So much so that the friggin' Pope of all people encouraged the peaceful Charles to invade and take the kingdom for himself. Side note, Naples once belonged to France, but then Ferdinand's dad, King Alfonso V, yoinked that shit several decades back for the Kingdom of Aragon. You're following all of this, right? So with that plan in his back pocket, the seemingly innocent Pope proceeded to persuade. You like it in Naples? You take it to Naples. Come on, you take it to Naples.
What's he saying about nipples?
Oh. With some questionable encouragement, Charles switched to attack mode, prepping France for full invasion. King Ferdinand, seeing French forces looming on the French horizon, warned his kingdom and allies of the imminent threat before his own departure into the Great Bed Bath & Beyond. In his stead was his son Alfonso II, who tried to reason with the invading Charles, telling him that he could take Milan instead, but leave Naples alone. Well, in 1494, Charles did take Milan. And then everything else. This was the first of many Italian wars. A French government was slammed into place, but just a few months later, the Italian peninsula discovered the power of friendship and drove the French from the land, bringing it all to a net zero outcome. Although all the neighboring kingdoms and such now knew that the Italians were easy pickings. Charles frigged off back to France with the goal of rebuilding his army to slap the shit out of some more Italians, but was never able to do so. Despite his ambitions and yearning to conquer in the name of the crown, the substantial mountain of debt that he just incurred prevented any future conquests. War is expensive after all. So unable to make any external changes, he instead looked towards the internal, focusing on cultural expansion and pioneering the French Renaissance. He relished in lavish architecture, the arts, and sports. One particular sport being jeu de paume, or game of the palm. Think tennis, but instead of smacking a ball with a sturdy racket, you did it with your bare hand. Charles just loved watching a bunch of dudes whacking their balls around, but sometimes life's simple pleasures end up cutting that life short. While heading on over to a match on April 7th, 1498, the king accidentally wanged his melon on a stone frame of a low doorway. A temporary moment of embarrassment, but with permanent consequences. The king shrugged it off and continued to watch the game, and everything seemed fine. Until it wasn't. The king collapsed in his seat and fell into a coma. Medical attention was called right away, but King Charles VIII had died just 9 hours later at the age of 27. He left the Kingdom of France fractured and in massive debt. Now, this little mishap is the king's most cited cause of death, but some modern historians claim that neurosyphilis and epileptic fits may have had something to do with it. Luckily though, the king had 6 whole kids to carry on the family lineage. Oh wait, they all died in infancy. Bummer. Little is really known about Duke Qing of Qin, with limited surviving knowledge of his existence being written in ancient Chinese texts, mainly the famous Zhuochuan, which discusses many ancient Chinese historical figures in the context of moral teachings and symbolism. Well, this poor duke got the short end of the stick with his life lesson. What we do know about dear old Qing was that he was a prominent ruler in the state of Qin during the Eastern Zhou dynasty, somewhere towards the beginning of the 6th century BC. He was regarded as a strong and wise military ruler, having brought peace and cooperation cooperation amongst these 6 clans within his own state. All he did was divide the state's existing military into 6 separate branches, one from each of the clans. This kept them happy and loyal, eager to share wisdom and advice on any domestic and foreign affairs to maintain peace. Keep your subjects happy and they won't try to rebel and kill you. Even though he was a man of domestic peace and prosperity, this didn't mean that he couldn't export a few strategic ass whoopings. His strong military coalition allowed the state of Qin to lay some major smackdowns on neighboring warring states during his reign, asserting dominance within the region. It's just a shame that such a prominent figure would be subject to such a bizarre death. According to the classical Chinese text in the Zuochuan, Qing was suddenly struck with sickness in the summer of 581 BC. Feeling like complete doo-doo, he consulted with a shaman for advice and a prognosis. And it wasn't good. Instead of any sort of useful medical advice, the shaman instead presented the Duke with a grim prophecy. You're gonna die, dude. The shaman informed the Duke that he had but a short time to live, specifically that he wouldn't live to feast on the wheat of the new harvest season. The Duke did not like that, so he had the shaman executed. As a bit of a fuck you, Qing had some farmers reap an unripe crop of wheat and mash it into flour to make a debatably delicious low-poly cake. Horrible idea. The quote-unquote cake only exacerbated his symptoms, leading to frequent tummy troubles. Such rumblies in his tumbly meant that he had to make a poopy and a potty. So, scrambling to the nearest possible shitter, the Duke slammed his cheeks down to make a Duke of his own. But the slamming of the cheeks was apparently overly aggressive as he fell right through the seat and into the cesspit below. Already in a weakened state due to illness, Qing was quickly overwhelmed by the rotting slop and drowned in the waste. Now, I know what you're thinking. With bizarre deaths such as this, there's often the suspicion of over-exaggeration or falsehoods, with more reasonable explanations for one's passing being brought up in other texts. However, a few other works of the time also mention this exact event, with 0 other sources even alluding to evidence of foul play or even an uneventful natural demise. So Qing is remembered as the Duke that fell into a turlet and done drowned. Pretty shitty. With a name like Stanislav Leszczynski, you know this guy was destined for greatness, and he was, kinda. During the Great Northern War, Sweden was just frothing at the gash for some faithful allies to assist in their defense against Russia and the aptly named anti-Swedish coalition, one of which was the Kingdom of Poland. The current Polish monarch, King Augustus II, was a cool guy and all, but wasn't very supportive of the Swedes, so let's just... there we go. Stanislav, one of the Polish king's most vocal opposers, had been installed on the throne by Sweden in 1704, and his rule remained valid as long as Sweden remained undefeated in the Great Northern War. The Swedish got their fish handed to them in 1709, with their king dethroned and forced into exile. With that, Augustus II politely knocked on the Polish royal doors to reclaim his throne. Sad Stanley was swept to the sidelines, but started to strategize. His beautiful cotton swab of a daughter got hitched to King Louis XV of France in 1725, a critical move of politics and power. With the French king now giving the old to his daughter, Stanislav would have a stronger claim to the Polish throne when the time came. And just like the French king, that time came rather quickly. In 1733, Augustus II had a bit of an embarrassing death himself. He went and snapped off an entire toe when entering a carriage. The wound got infected, which, in pre-modern medical terms, means death. Now, you would think that the throne would be passed down to Augustus' son, right? Wrong. The Polish king unfortunately never made the throne a hereditary inheritance, which was a grave mistake. Instead, the throne was formally up for grabs through a royal election. The winner, of course, was none other than Stanislav Leszczynski, so he was made king. Again. However, Russia, the winner of the whole Great Northern War thing, objected, demanding that the throne be rightfully passed to Augustus' son. Thus, a new war began. The War of the Polish Succession. French and Russian forces proceeded to blow each other to bits in Austria over who should be the rightful Polish king. 2 years and 88,000 deaths later, the two agreed on a ceasefire and Stan was forced to surrender the throne. But in my opinion, he made out on the deal. He had to give up his kingship, sure, but he was made Duke of the territories of Lorraine and Bar, living a wealthy and peaceful life in the comfy, cozy countryside, actively ruling the territories and writing philosophy in his spare time. But during one of his relaxing evenings of spitting poetic flames onto parchment in 1766, tragedy struck. Clad in his iconic silk robes, the now 88-year-old Stanislav nodded off near the fireplace. A rogue spark set his clothing ablaze, waking him up in a panic. The fire seared the old man's already withering flesh, resulting in devastating burns. Luckily, nearby servants rushed in and were able to extinguish the flames, but it was too late. Upon examination by his close friend and personal physician, Stanislav suffered severe burns to the left side of his body. His hand was completely burned to the bone. Being a bit of a big boy, Stanislav's stomach was burned as far as 8 centimeters or just over 3 inches under the skin. Over the next 2 weeks, the ex-monarch was slathered in all kinds of lotions and potions, and he seemed to be on the up and up. But then, of course, came the infection. By the 13th day of treatment, the skin on his hand had slid right off, revealing gangrenous sores. He was covered in oozing, festering, and excruciatingly painful wounds. Medical practitioners did anything and everything in their knowledge and power, but the pain and suffering was just too great. Unable to bear even the slightest movement, Stanislav was transferred to his armchair where he painfully passed on February 23, 1766. His territories of Lorraine and Bar transitioned over to French control upon his death, a stipulation that was agreed upon when he became duke. Word of advice: don't sleep within inches of an open fire unless you want to end up a burnt pile of pus. Rest in peace, Stan. Bela the Bison was a man of great fame, whose physical achievements gave him his name. Vigorous strength and tactical skill forced friends and foes to bend to his will. Power he had, but a crown he had not. In a brother's betrayal, he would find himself caught. But blood can be spilled and bond can be broken if you've only the will and the words to be spoken. Now take caution and heed with what was agreed. Your fate will catch up at blistering speed. Heavy is the crown if the throne should be weak, for this king will be lost with a simple squeak. That took me like 20 minutes to write. Anyway, Bela of Hungary was a strong dude, having gained his fame after slapping the socks off of a formidable Pomeranian warrior. No, not the dog, the region. His big brother Andrew was crowned king of Hungary around the year 1046. That was good news for Bela, because thanks to the Hungarian rule of fraternal succession, he would be next in line to the throne in case anything happened to his brother, which, of course, being king, usually meant that something was going to happen to you. And something did, but not from any foreign entity wishing to grab a piece of that land. It was Bela himself. Andrew had completely circumvented that whole tradition of fraternal succession, revising the rules to instead have the crown passed to his own son.
Daddy, I wish to be king, Daddy.
But Andrew famously offered Bela a choice: take the crown and probably get assassinated, or take the sword and remain a faithful and noble warrior. Bela took the sword, but had no intention of remaining loyal. After gathering a gaggle of groupies who supported his claim, Bela turned against his brother in 1060 and seized the crown for himself. Andrew died. Now king of the castle, Bela got to work, aiming to sweep his whole just-stole-the-crown move under the rug. He gave clemency to any of his brother's supporters in order to build loyalty and trust, but of course, not everyone was happy with the usurper. That Holy Roman Empire just next door was looking a little kerfuffled, having supported Bela's nephew, Solomon, as the true king. Bela had attempted to compromise with the big scary empire, offering the would-be king lordship, but them Holy Romans shot it down. With no peace treaty in the cards, Bela built up his defenses in anticipation of an invasion, but he knew that this would be futile. Just 3 years into his reign, he planned to give up the throne to his nephew amidst political turmoil, but the throne would be lost sooner than expected. In the summer of 1063, the chronically concerned King Bela sat ever so comfortably on said throne. Yep. According to several medieval chronicles, including the Chronicon Pictum, a 14th century Hungarian compilation of 11th and 12th century records, Bela's own throne collapsed out from underneath him. Was it sabotage? Karma? Poor craftsmanship? Who knows? Now, he was still alive, but Bela was seriously injured from the whole debacle, reportedly seeming half dead. Well, he became full dead several weeks later, succumbing to his injuries in September of 1063 at the age of 45. That little nephew of his ended up taking back the throne. After it was properly repaired, of course. Archduchess Matilda of Austria didn't really get to accomplish much in her life. That's because she was only 18 when she crossed over into the Shadow Realm, unfortunately by her own mistake. And boy was it a doozy. Matilda came from a powerful family lineage. Her grandfather, Archduke Charles of Austria, was a key figure in defeating Napoleon Bonaparte in the Napoleonic Wars. Her great-grandfather, Leopold II, was the brother of Marie Antoinette and the penultimate emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So she had some huge shoes to fill. Now, unfortunately for Matilda and most noble women throughout history, this usually meant that you were just going to be married off to someone powerful for political gain, which was the case. Matilda was to be betrothed to the Crown Prince of Italy in an attempt to turn down the temperature on some heated relationships between Italy and the newly formed Austria-Hungary, because marriage always helps fix bad relationships. However, these marital celebrations would never come to be. You see, young Matilda was a woman of habit, a bad habit. Since she lived in such a state of stress, she savored the smoking of cigarettes. Of course, her father wasn't too keen on this tendency of tobacco dependency, often warning her of the dangers of such a habit. "This habit is dangerous." He also warned her of the many health risks. "There are many health risks." Finally, he had straight up forbidden her from smoking. But all of those foreboding flashbacks didn't prevent the Archduchess from indulging. One evening in May of 1867, Matilda was getting ready to attend the theater, dressing up in her finest, poofiest, most combustible dress. After fitting into the thing, she fancied herself a tobacco snacky, lighting one up for a few quick drags. Whilst puffing away, her ear holes detected the vibrations of footsteps approaching. Her father's footsteps. In a panic, she carelessly concealed the cigarette in the back folds of her dress. "All ready to go to the theater, my dear?" he said in whatever language Austrians speak. "Ach, very good. You aren't smoking in here, are you?" "Nein." "Okay then, off we go." The poor girl's dress ignited in a roar of flames. Her blood-curdling screams alerted servants to attempt to extinguish the fire. They were successful, but the damage was done. The Archduchess's neck, her back, her arms, and her crack all suffered severe second and third degree burns. She was alive, but in critical condition. Ugh, so no theater? For more than 2 weeks, Matilda received around-the-clock care for her wounds. Similar to poor Stanisław from before, the medical knowledge at the time surrounding treatment of severe burns remained limited. No more than just lathering ointments and bandages and hoping for healing. The crucial process of removing dead skin and applying antiseptics just wasn't standardized or even practiced yet. This resulted in victims succumbing to deadly infections from the fetid flesh. Matilda's wounds turned gangrenous as the infection continued to spread. Despite medical efforts, she died from her self-immolation injuries on June 6, 1867. Remember, that smoking kills. Unless you're smoking a tender rack of ribs. The majority of Alexander's life was nothing short of chaotic, and it was in no small part thanks to the events surrounding World War I. Dear old dad King Constantine I set a Greek policy of neutrality when Europe was banging away at itself during the Great War. This was neutral on paper, but Constantine's familial ties to the German crown had him leaning in that direction. I mean, he was married to Kaiser Wilhelm's sister for Pete's sake. No need to piss off the in-laws. Instead, he ended up pissing off his own people. His political stance angered the Greek prime minister, who went and tattled to the Triple Entente of Russia, France, and Great Britain. Fearing a new potential enemy, they decided to nip Greece in the bud. In 1917, Constantine was thrown off his throne, surrendering it to his younger, more easily manipulated son, Alexander. Alex regrettably accepted the crown at age 23. You see, even though he was now king, Alex knew that he held no real power. That was instead now transferred to the prime minister. Now viewed as traitors, Alex's family was cast into exile. As for Alex himself, he fled Athens to his family's summer home in Tatoi, which is like right up the road. Seriously, it's like a half-hour drive. But it was here that Alex suffered what he thought was a rather inconsequential wound. Well, he was about to be proven very wrong. While out on a stroll on the palace's property, Alex noticed that his pet dog was getting bullied by one of the palace's steward's pet monkeys. He rushed over to break up the fight, but was intercepted by a second monkey bearing vicious fangs. Macaque! That's right, a Barbary macaque. The monkey chomped Alex right on his chest and on his leg. Luckily, he was able to fend off the beasts, returning home to assess the situation. The bites were small, so Alex wasn't too terribly worried. His wounds were hastily cleaned and dressed, but not properly disinfected. You can probably guess where this is going. Just a few meager hours later, Alex developed a crippling fever. The wounds had already developed an infection, and sepsis was beginning to set in. Sepsis, in case you didn't know, is your body's oh fuck response to a severe infection. Your immune system goes into crazy maximum overdrive to fight off said infection, but can very well end up killing you as it tries to save you. Unfortunately for Alex, his doctors could not control his fever and considered amputation of the affected leg to minimize further spread of the infection. Neither doctor wanted the figurative and literal blood on their hands. The king's condition worsened over the following weeks before he finally bit the dust on October 25th, 1920 at the age of 27. Never mess with monkeys. They are no joke.
Yeah, that witch is becoming a real problem. This time, you've been sent into ancient Greece, specifically the classical era. A time of great war and conflict, but also a remarkable leap forward in human civilization. So, can you survive one of humanity's greatest expansions? Or will ancient Greece thermop the floor with you? Let's find out. Greece's classical period began in 510 BC when Athens fell and broke its Hippias, and ended in 323 BC when Alexander was no longer great. As an act of kindness, you've been sent to the funny year. But there's nothing funny about needing to survive. The first thing you need to do is dust yourself off and get your bearings. Maybe a sign or something will help. Well, that's no use. You quickly recall your vast knowledge acquired from countless hours on GeoGuessr and look around for some notable landmarks. After all, some of these buildings still exist in the modern day. Well, there's a familiar sight right over there on the horizon. The Acropolis of Athens. That's in Athens. I must be in Athens. Well, now you know where you are, which means you can start figuring out your next steps for survival. Ooh. But first, you need someone to talk to because you're gonna need help. There's never any shame in asking for help. That guy over there seems friendly enough. Although shorter, the dude is absolutely ripped from his labor-intensive chores and looks like he could kill you in one punch, but you approach him anyway. Told you. Now let's assume he's a bit more approachable this time. You begin to ask him a question, but like a monolingual American, you always forget that there are other languages out there besides the freedom one. But you try your best. Here it goes. Hey man, can you help me out here? The man turns his chiseled jaw your way and begins to speak, quickly bombarding you with a bunch of indiscernible mouth sounds that completely fry your brain. But luckily, the words have been displayed in a big old bubble next to his head. Look at all them silly letters. Wait a minute, you say, scratching your chin. I've seen these letters before. Just then, you get a flashback to your college girlfriend's sorority dorm where you found the Euclidean letters, just as you were finding Herclidean. Don't kid yourself. You were doing math homework, you goober. Unfortunately, you come to the realization that knowing just a few letters doesn't mean jack shit in terms of understanding a whole language. Now, some of you modern Greeks out there might lift your hairy arms and say, "Ha, I can speak Greek, I'd survive." Well, you're wrong. Ancient Greek is completely different from modern Greek with completely different tones, vocal inflections, and pronunciations across several regional dialects. Ancient Greeks wouldn't understand a word of modern Greek, so you'd have no real advantage. Needless to say, you're not going to be communicating anytime soon, at least not orally. You begin attempting some charades as a way to express your needs. Too bad all of your wacky waving is perceived as a threat. Man, that's twice. Since you just insulted a random citizen and are an obvious outsider, you're arrested and sold into slavery. Looks like you've been slammed to the bottom of the societal barrel. But what did you expect? Speaking of society, like any society in history, ancient Greece operated under a hierarchy. Since you just got dunked into classical Athens, let's focus on that. Here, there were four main groups. The upper class were the elite, the cream of the crop, and we all know that the cream rises to the top. To be a part of the upper class was a birthright. You must have been born in Athens to a moderately or highly wealthy family and be well educated. And a guy. The members of this class were the only ones that held any political power and the only ones classified as citizens. That being the case, the upper class controlled all social and economic policies as well as law. As a democracy, 500 citizens were chosen at random each year to run the government, given complete control over the proposal of new policies and laws. Kind of like an oligarchy. These policies were either accepted or rejected by popular vote. Next was the middle class. Usually referred to as the medics, they were all the dudes who weren't born in Athens but still lived there. Foreign skilled laborers such as craftsmen, merchants, and artists. These guys built ships, constructed buildings, and kept the city maintained. Sure, they didn't have a lot of rights like the ability to own land or vote in governmental affairs, but they were the core of the Greek economy. You know, a thing that barely exists today. Oh yeah, women were also part of the middle class. Not many rights outside of being in charge of the house and raising the kids. Ancient Greek society wasn't too fair to women. The lower class, or the freedmen, were exactly who you think they were. Come on, it's right there in the name. They were freed men, former slaves who bought their own freedom through intensive labor and saving. They pulled themselves up by their sandal straps and worked hard their whole life, only to have little to no rights or place in society. But hey, at least they aren't smelly slaves anymore. Slaves were lower than dirt in the societal hierarchy and weren't even considered a class. They were usually captured prisoners of war or purchased from former traders. Slaves were either owned by families as house servants or by the government outright for general labor, which came in all kinds of flavors. Farmers, bankers, soldiers, employed friends with benefits, police, all kinds of stuff. Imagine being arrested by a slave. Sir, you have the right to remain silent. Huh, well, at least I have rights. Slaves made up about a third of the population and were an absolute goldmine for their owners. Profit margins are pretty healthy when you don't have to pay them much, or at all. Speaking of gold mines, that's where you're headed. Time to get branded and get a move on. You're swiftly carted off to join a group of miners so large it would cause a YouTube elite to start sweating. Oh man, looks like all the cool slaves have been sent to the surface mine to get gold and silver. But since your mining level sucks, you get to go underground for some cuprum. That's copper. Working in a mine was brutal. Slaves were subjected to intense labor all day, working in poorly ventilated and swelteringly hot cave systems hundreds of feet deep in the earth, illuminated only by dim oil lamps. You can't see shit, which means your fellow slaves can't see jack shit, so watch out for rogue pickaxes. You toil away day in and day out for a while now, but notice that, like the rock around you, you're getting chiseled. The combination of your new Mediterranean diet and constant physical exertion is starting to pay off. You're able to mine more efficiently, and you're outperforming your coworkers. Thanks to all of your hard work and dedication, the local mine supervisor rewards you with more backbreaking work. Looks like you gotta add your pride to a list of things getting crushed around these parts. You're working hard and gaining some gains, but you need to start finding a way out of here soon. You see, the life expectancy for miners was only a few years. With hazards like coal dust, lead exposure, and cave-ins, it was a quick way to have your lifespan get completely rocked. Ah, geez. Looks like Atticus is showing signs of a fever. And Pucus over there? He's earning his namesake. You ask your buddy Atlas what the heck's going on, to which he responds, looks like they all caught some sort of... No matter where you throw a dart on the board of history, diseases were always in the spotlight. Perhaps the most common in classical Greek times were smallpox, influenza, and measles. Luckily for you, your parents love you and got you vaccinated when you were just a wee babby, right? Of course, otherwise you'd look like this. But ancient Greeks weren't so lucky. It was pretty common for outbreaks to be spontaneous and run rampant, killing off people by the thousands. And what kind of disease discussion would it be without the mention of the plague? Yeah, the plague showed up in ancient Athens right around 430 BC, 10 years before you arrived. During that time, it eradicated between 75 to 100,000 people, or about a quarter of the city's population. The plague comes in 3 flavors: bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic, and strawberry. They're all basically the same thing, but affect you in different ways. Bubonic was the most common, as it's kind of stage 1 of the plague. Usually transferred from a flea giving you a little nibble, the plague is a bacterial infection that just penetrates your cells and fills them with toxins, killing them. This will also cause you to have a fever, the chills, and make you generally feel like shit. Your body will also start getting polluted with bumpy boils. If left untreated, the infection can spread to your blood, where it upgrades to septicemic plague. This is when parts of your body get the rot and start to turn black, causing severe pain as well as more frequent, unprovoked traffic stops. If the infection gets into your lungs, that's when it's classified as pneumonic plague. You begin coughing like crazy, and your respiratory system starts to fail. And that's no good. Luckily, doctors at the time relied less on the big guys in the sky for help and decided to take matters into their own hands, establishing and developing the concept of medical treatment. It was widely believed that the key to a healthy life was to consume healthy foods like fruits, veggies, nuts, meats, and dairy, not to mention plenty of exercise. Crazy thought, right? But if you did get the ick, there were a few solutions. The most common was bloodletting. Look, you're just a big walking blood sac, and since you're sick, that means you've got time to get rid of that. Thanks, Doc. I feel so... Other treatments were often natural remedies like herbs, soups, teas, and honey to heal your little stummy. But anyway, you're safe cause you're vaccinated, which means that you're the sole survivor of a recent outbreak and you really like trains. Guess you're a free man now. Being very free and very man means that you now have access to education. Sorry ladies, you're gonna have to wait a while before you learn good. Time to hit the books. Now that your yearning for the minds is now a yearning for learning, it's time to trade your physical gains for mental ones. Ancient Greece had a wealth of educational resources including public and private schools, personal tutors, intellectual lectures, and a recent invention: books. Books started showing up around the 5th century. It was a great way to record down your stories and lectures without having to memorize them. But some pretentious Greek geeks like the famed philosopher Socrates believed that books would be the downfall of society, as people would just write things down rather than commit knowledge to memory. But imagine this: if you wanted to learn a story or a bit of information, you had to catch Rheticus on a Tuesday afternoon next to a fountain in the park, but you showed up a little bit late and missed half the story.
Yeah, can you rewind like 10 minutes, please?
Found a really good Euro spot. You want some? Nah, more for me. You attend several lectures and slowly learn to read and write the local dialect, Attic Greek. Not to be confused with Basement Greek. Although they were rare, you managed to find a small public library to see if there's anything interesting, when something catches your eye. Oh, no way. What the fuck? Like I said, I'd survive.
Horrifying mythical creatures that you've never heard of. Seldom would you find tales of critters and creatures more terrifying than those from Southeast Asia, places like the diesel of nightmare fuel. First up is the Pontianak, a malevolent spirit with a bone to pick. Specifically yours, all 206 of them. Originating from the likes of Malaysian and Indonesian folklore, the Pontianak is said to be the vengeful spirit of a pregnant woman who either died in childbirth or at the hands of her partner. So imagine that you're taking a midnight Malaysian stroll, slurping down a Malaysian meal of Malaysian soup. Through the aroma of boiling broth and steamy veggies, your nose catches the subtle scent of flowers, your ears, the delicate cry of an infant. It's just then that you spot a figure in the dark, standing beneath a big, beautiful, bountiful banana tree. Gracefully creeping into the moonlight is a young woman, clad in a flowing white dress with silky, long, raven black hair, and friggin' sweet honkers. But that's how they get you. Seduction is the Pontianak's weapon of choice, at least for the initial bait. But as long as you're a nice guy, you should have nothing to fear. And not the Reddit definition of a nice guy. Cheaters, beaters, and legend leaguers all face a terrible fate should they cross the path of a Pontianak, so approach at your own risk. If you do find yourself overcome with the manly urge to try to pick up a ghostly gal in the middle of the night, you'll notice a few things as you make your move. For one, that delightful floral scent quickly turns to pure putrescence. Her soft pale hands now don razor-sharp nails, and her delicate face now bears bloodthirsty fangs. You're in for a rough encounter. The Pontianak has a purely physical attack style, so keeping your distance would have been wise. If you survive the shock of her terrifying appearance, you're gonna wish that you hadn't, as all of your pain receptors will now be the ones screaming. Speaking of which, a Pontianak may choose to let out a deafening wail, capable of rupturing your eardrums. But bleeding ears are the least of your worries, cause soon you'll have a bleeding belly. As a symbolic gesture for the child that she was never able to bear, a Pontianak will take her terrifying talons and tear through your trembling tummy, stealing your stomach, looting your liver, and kidnapping your kidneys. Why? Because they taste good. But if you don't feel like having your insides being converted to outsides, here's what you can do. First and most obvious, don't approach crying women in the middle of the night. It's a huge red flag. Walk on. That's someone else's problem. Second, take a glance down at her piggies. Legends state that Pontianacs have gross feet, so this may be a warning sign to hightail it out of there. Or she might just have gross feet. As a third option, albeit a bit expensive, is that Pontianacs apparently hate the sound of cannon blasts, so if you're facing peril, have her stare down a barrel. Fourth, final, and most effective if you find yourself about to be shredded to bits, is managing to get behind the spooky spirit and jamming an iron nail into the nape of her neck. This is the Pontianac's factory reset spot, rendering her docile, subdued, and apparently according to some strange versions of the legend, she will become quote-unquote the perfect wife, at least until the nail is removed. Then she just gets back to her murderous ways. Now we jump ship from Southeast Asia to the forests of West Africa with the Sosobonsam. The OG jump scarer, this slippery little devil hides in the canopies of the forests of Ghana, waiting for its next victim to wander through the woods. The beings are said to be huge, much larger than an average human, with jaws capable of swallowing a head whole in one gulp. Although oddly proportioned, the Sosobonsam is ape-like in appearance with gangly, dangly arms and legs and a slender torso, often depicted with dark or red-colored fur. Using its iron hook feet to grip a grasp on Ghanaian growth, the Sosobonsam lurks in the trees awaiting its prey. Once spotted, the monster will wiggle its fingies in delight with a "don't mind if I do" attitude, like it's about to grab the last hot dog out of the warm Wawa hot dog cabinet. Going in for the kill, the Sosobonsam swings from the tree limbs to snatch and grab any would-be traveler, should they be caught unawares alone in the dead of night. The monster's monstrous arms envelop you in a deadly death hug, crushing your bones and internals. Luckily, this will most likely send you to the Shadow Realm before it ever gets a chance to feed on your remains. If you're more of a cautious individual, the Sosobonsam may attempt to disarm or disorient you with its ability to mimic familiar sounds. Oh, what was that? Once you've been thrown off course, your life expectancy quickly drops to mere seconds as the swinging vampire monkey man makes its move. But if you don't want to end up a monkey man's meal, there are precautions that you can take. For one, never travel alone in the forest at night. It's kind of the takeaway lesson for this legend. Travel with a companion to avoid an untimely demise and to spark good conversation. And I told the guy, no tomato on the sandwich. And what does he do? He puts extra tomatoes on it. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Fuck up. You know, it wasn't even. Additionally, protective charms blessed by your local village priest are said to ward off the creatures as they hate the taste of religion. But if these simple solutions just don't seem possible, don't worry, for another solution is already in the making, and you can thank chocolate. Now, before you embarrassingly offer a bar to the beast, let me explain. You see, Sosobonsams thrive in the trees, so let's just get rid of the trees. Thanks to excessive cocoa farming, Ghana has lost a majority of its primary forest since the 1950s. Sure, the trees are gone, but so is this fictitious freak. Strap on some earmuffs, cause this next creature's a real screecher. Slopped out of Southern Slavic folklore is the Drekavac, which translates to the Screamer. This myth takes on many forms across several different variations of its story, but for this video, we will go with its infant form. The Drekavac is said to be the restless spirit of an unbaptized child, desperate for salvation. According to legend, the Drekavac takes the form of a gray, emaciated young child. Little limber limbs accompany its frail stature, offset only by its monstrously large dome, which definitely devastated a birth canal upon entry into this world. They are most prevalent around Christmas time, sure to put a damper on anyone's festivities, but they certainly will not go unnoticed. Problem is, one glance at this little fellow will make you go, ugh. Not a thought exists behind its bulging, glassy black eyes. No thought, but death. If it wasn't obvious by its name, the Drekavac is capable of emitting eardrum-rupturing shrieks, able to bring you to your knees in a single squeal. Yeah, like that. Now, the Drekavac itself is not an immediate threat in terms of it wanting to convert you into a fresh marinara. Instead, it serves as a looming omen. It is said that those who find themselves in its shadow are doomed to die a terrible death in the coming days. Whole villages may suffer cruel fates should they spot one nearby. The legend itself is often used as a deterrent for young children, teaching them to not wander too far from home lest they cross paths with the diminutive demon. Strange howls or yells in the night from local wildlife are often attributed to the Drekavac as a way to prove their existence to traumatized children. I mean, some of us were told that a giant anthropomorphic rabbit breaks into our houses once a year to leave us candy offerings in exchange for good behavior, so is it really that far-fetched? Parents do a lot to make sure that their kids behave, don't they? Honestly, I can't wait to tell Little Chat one day about how a small fairy will break in through his window to steal his dead teeth in exchange for a few bucks. Well, like most critters, the Drekavac can be defeated. The most obvious method is having the child properly baptized, finally putting its soul to rest. So, just have your friendly neighborhood priest join the party and cast holy on its unholy ass. Or, splash a cup of holy water in its face. Rest in peace. Japanese folklore. Definitely a very creative culture for instilling fear into kids and adults alike. After all, we need to balance the uwu anime girls with something a bit more fearsome. The Teki Teki does just that. Born from tragedy, this ghastly ghoul is the result of a young woman or schoolgirl who had fallen or was pushed onto train tracks and failed to get out of the way in time, causing her to become 50% lighter, but 100% angrier. I prefer the story of it being a malicious push, as simply just falling onto the train tracks is your own fault. Stay behind the yellow line at all times, people. Being a vengeful spirit, or Onryo, the Teki Teki is a violent little vixen, aiming to hunt down the living who wander around deserted locations or train tracks in the middle of the night. Her existence serves solely as a cautionary tale for kids, discouraging any late-night adventures to such places. It's interesting the tales that parents come up with to protect their children. So instead of it being like, "Alright, Dad, I'm going to that old abandoned factory with some friends." The hell you are, that place isn't safe. It's more like, "Alright, Dad, I'm going to that old abandoned factory with some friends." Sure, no problem. Just make sure you don't get murdered by
the factory fingerer.
What? Any encounter with a Teki Teki could be your last. While they are just a half-body apparition of a young girl, they're still a force to be reckoned with. You may first become aware of its arrival by the sound of its hands slapping on the cement, which is how it walks, and the origin of its onomatopoeic name. In some tellings of the story, she carries a small scythe as a weapon. Others, she bears razor-sharp nails. If approached, she may ask you a simple question.
Where are my legs?
In Japanese, of course. This is a trick question. She ain't got no legs, Lieutenant Dan. Though, if you see a ghostly gal with her insides spilling out lumbering towards you on her hands, it should be common sense that you 180 the hell out of there. But you'd be wrong. Although she is restricted to just arms for movement, she is noted to be incredibly fast, even able to catch up to cars if necessary. Once she gets a hold of you, she will treat you to a similar fate as her own, using her scythe or nails to crack you open like a football Sunday beer can. Now, according to legend, and unfortunately for you, there's no clear way to defeat her, mainly just heeding the tale's warning to avoid deserted areas and train tracks. However, I'm sure a solid 45-yard field goal attempt could get the job done. What's scarier than a skeleton? A giant skull that flies. Originating from the folklore of the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee Native Americans surrounding the Great Sacandaga Lake in upstate New York, this sizable skull monster is the stuff of nightmares. Dubbed the Ganastistonje, this disembodied man-eating head's goal is to consume anything and everything. Men, women, children, entire villages, Prilosec, you name it. These dirigible domes are said to be the cursed souls of ones who have engaged in cannibalism or other various horrific acts within their lifetime. Thus, they are doomed to roam the earth with the curse of insatiable hunger. These heads can take the form of just mere skulls, but some versions of the tale depict them as full-fleshed faces with long flowing hair, either with feathered or bat-like wings. Their description reminds me a lot of those skulls from the Zelda franchise, particularly that one giant fella in the bottom of the well in Ocarina of Time. But I digress. It is said that even speaking about them attracts them to an area, as they have been known to descend on entire villages who keep their legend alive. Once summoned, these monsters begin wreaking havoc, biting and tearing victims apart, or swallowing them in one gulp, only to have to bite them immediately after, since they have no stomach. Their speed and sheer size makes escape nearly impossible. Even if you're hiding in a house like a little frightened mouse or scared as all hell while hidden in a well, they'll attack your shack for a crack at a tender little snack. In terms of defeating them, you're kind of SOL, as legends state that the Ganastistonje is virtually immortal and thus cannot be destroyed, save for one primitive weapon: fire. So get out your lighter and your pocket can of body spray and get to it.
Neat. If you're going to be executed, you'd probably want the process to be relatively quick and painless, be it one fell swoop from the guillotine, a short drop and a sudden stop, or just getting injected with Nighty Night juice. But sometimes, things don't go according to plan. So let's see how it all went wrong for a few poor unfortunate souls. If you're getting your melon chopped off, you're going to want two things, a sharp blade and a trained executioner. Poor Margaret Pole got maybe one of those. Once the very wealthy Countess of Salisbury, not the steak, Margaret fell from the good graces of King Henry VIII when she went all girl boss on him for divorcing his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Henry brushed this off, but was set over the edge when Margaret's very influential Catholic cardinal son, Reginald Pole, also scolded him, but from a safe distance over in Italy.
Hey Henry, you suck!
The proud Protestant king responded, being all right, bet, and imprisoned Margaret, Reginald, and the rest of her family in the Tower of London.
That'll teach you.
Margaret was held for 2.5 years in the Tower in actually pretty fair conditions, with her own personal servants and lavish clothing, until one morning when she got a surprise visitor. Hey Margaret, how's it going? You look great, by the way. I love that dress. So listen, yeah, you're gonna be executed today. Okay, bye. That morning on May 27th, 1541, Margaret was led to a courtyard to have her dome knocked off. Unfortunately for her, the main executioner had been sent away to fight some rebels, so his intern filled in. Generally, executions are supposed to be swift and smooth. Not this one. The inexperienced executioner couldn't chop worth shit, so he ended up just hacking Margaret's back and neck to bits. Oops. 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 It took 11 swings to finally detach head from body. Now, if you're going to be executed, you might as well have done something pretty cool to deserve it. Take Robert Francois Damier, for example. As a very French man, he hated his very French king, King Louis XV, because reasons. Well, in 1757, he decided to channel that hatred into something productive, like developing an elaborate plan to kill the king. As the merry monarch was entering his carriage at the Palace of Versailles, Damier mashed the A button to rush past the bodyguards and stab the king with a penknife. Fortunately for King Louis, his thick-ass royal king coat was thick enough to stop the pen from doing any severe damage, and the pen only penetrated less than ½ of an inch into his chest, causing nothing but a flesh wound. Damier was immediately arrested, convicted, and sentenced to be drawn and quartered by horses. Now, if you're unfamiliar with such an execution method, it's exactly as it sounds. No, not that. There we go. A rope is tied around each limb and strapped to a horse. 4 limbs, 4 horses. They then pull in opposite directions until your limbs pop out of their sockets one by one. Real fun stuff. Well, that's how it's supposed to go. Reportedly, Damier had stubborn anatomy that just refused to separate at all. So, to make things a little bit easier, his arms and legs had their tendons cut to make the ripping easier. After his last limb detached, he was reported to have still been alive, so his stumpy, bloody torso was burned to finish the job. Bit overkill for a little scratch with a penknife, but whatever. Thomas Ketchum, who has no relation to the world-famous Pokemon trainer, was an infamous American outlaw who would give Arthur Morgan a run for his money.
Quack, quack.
Ketchum, also known as Black Jack, had his own posse of cowboys for some rootin' tootin', robbin' and shootin'. Ketchum and his gang terrorized the Wild West in the late 1800s with a string of shootouts, robberies, murders, but they had bigger ambitions with heftier payouts. That's when Tom decided to go for gold. Literal gold. On trains. He was gonna rob trains. With his brother Sam at his side, the two robbed trains to the tune of a modern-day equivalent of a few $1 million over the years. But eventually, their luck ran out. On a solo run, Sam was injured in a shootout, arrested, and died of an infection of his wounds a few days later. Tom, unaware that his brother just bit the dust robbing a train, made an attempt on the very same train just a month later. At this point, the train conductor's a little sick of getting robbed, so he pulled an Uno reverse card on Tom, using a shotgun to blast away his elbow. The train chugged away and Tom was left injured on the wayside, where he was later arrested by law enforcement. For his countless crimes over the years, Tom was sentenced to death by hanging. Unfortunately for Tom, though, the small New Mexico town had no experience actually hanging a man, so they did the best they could. Gallows? Check. Prisoner? Check. Length of hanging rope? I don't know. The gallows were tested with a 200-pound sack of flour, which seemed to have been successful. But the problem here is that the same rope that was tested was reused for the execution, so that 200-pound sack made the rope really tight. Since Tom was notorious at this point, crowds flocked to witness his execution. On April 26, 1901, the rope was placed around Tom's neck and the trapdoor was sprung. The townsfolk ended up getting way more than they bargained for. The long, tight rope instantly decapitated Tom once he reached the apex of his final descent. He should have quit, but now he's just ahead. But at least he made a cool postcard. Hey, quick side note here. So I'm realizing that there's like no image resources for this section, so I hope you don't mind some crude artwork. King Calorso GL was the second woman in Thai history to be put to death by gunfire. Being a nanny to the 6-year-old son of a wealthy business family, she was promptly fired because... But that didn't sit too well with her. In a desperate attempt to get some money, she, along with several accomplices, had kidnapped the 6-year-old for ransom. They had demanded 200,000 Thai baht, or $6,000, for the release of the boy. After the terrified family failed to follow the exact directions of where to bring the ransom money, the young boy was brutally beaten and buried alive. GL had attempted to save the boy with whom she had grown fond of, but failed to do so. GL and her accomplices were quickly arrested and sentenced to death by firing squad. Now, Thailand did firing squads a bit different from what you'd expect. Instead of lining a blindfolded prisoner to a wall with several gunmen taking aim, the prisoner is instead tied facing backward on a wooden cross. A concealing screen is put up with a target pointing in the vicinity of the prisoner's heart, and a rifle is lined up to the target. A single executioner is instructed to fire up to 15 shots at the target, guaranteeing the prisoner's death. On January 13th, 1979, GL was executed and carted off to the morgue, and all seemed to have been successful. But that thought quickly evaporated once GL was found screaming her frickin' head off in the morgue and attempting to stand up. But why wasn't the execution successful, you might ask? Well, I'll tell you if you just wait a minute. Jeez. It turns out that GL's genetics played a prank on her. She was diagnosed with situs inversus, meaning that all of her organs were mirrored to how they normally should be, with her heart on her right side of her chest rather than her left. So those initial shots all missed her heart entirely, and instead of killing her, just ended up hurting a lot. She was instantly pulled from the morgue, set up once more on the cross, and given another volley of justice seeds to the back. When it comes to new inventions, they usually go through rigorous testing and tweaks to perfect their function before being put on the market for commercial use. Well, since the electric chair wasn't a commercial product, who cares? Improvements can be made later on once enough testing is performed. William Kemmler was such a test subject. A poor businessman and a drunk, Kemmler often found himself in trouble. According to an article in the New York Times, on March 29, 1889, Kemmler was recovering from a drinking binge the night before when he became enraged with his wife, Tilly Ziegler. He accused her of stealing from him and preparing to run away with a friend of his. When the argument had reached a peak, Kemmler calmly went to the barn out back, grabbed a hatchet, and returned to the house. He struck Tilly repeatedly, killing her. He then went to a neighbor's house and announced that he had just murdered his wife. Kemmler was arrested, swiftly convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to be executed by a brand new invention. On August 6, 1890, Kemmler was brought to the chair. He reportedly did not resist in any way and willingly accepted his punishment. After being secured and wishing everyone farewell, the switch was thrown. 1,000 volts were put through Kemmler's body for 17 agonizing seconds. Kemmler was unconscious, but alive. The voltage was doubled and power was thrown again. This is where things became spectacular. It was reported by witnesses that Kemmler's blood vessels ruptured and bled under his skin and his entire body caught fire. The entire execution room filled with the foul odor of burning flesh, causing many witnesses to panic and flee. The execution lasted 8 terrifying minutes. An autopsy showed that Kemmler's skull had burnt to a crisp and his brain cooked to a tender medium rare.
It looks stunning.
The New York Times later published a review stating that the executioner would have done better with an axe. What do you mean you're out of breadsticks? Freshly grated Parmesan, sir. Oh, yes, please. Very good, sir. Just say when. Alright, but it's gonna be a while. Oh, no, 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 no! Here we go again with the witch and such. You really should have taken better precautionary measures. Oh well. This time you're being lobbed into ancient Rome, a civilization that, apparently, is always on the mind of any male over the age of 20. But for you, you'll get to live it, or at least try to. Let's see what you're capable of, shall we? You arrive in the year 250, right in the middle of the ominously named Crisis of the 3rd Century, a tumultuous time of terrible turmoil which began a while back in 235 after Emperor Severus Alexander was assassinated. Classic Roman Emperor move. After being confronted by Germanic invaders, he, with some influence from his mother, came to the conclusion that violence was not the answer. Instead, he would pay off the invaders to frig off back home. What a great idea, Severus thought. It was not. In response, Emperor Alexander's most trusted military generals didn't appreciate seeing potential funding go to would-be invaders. So, they made a direct deposit of a knife into the emperor's neck, with interest. With him out of the way, the Roman Empire kind of fell on hard times, as empires tend to do when their emperors are killed off. New emperors were coming and going like one-night stands, the military became fractured and weakened thanks to countless civil wars and a struggle for power, and divided empire states took their chances at yoinking some lesser protected land for themselves. All really chaotic stuff, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, here you are, smack dab in the middle of Rome. Actually, you've landed in the Amphitheatrum Flavium, but you might know it as the Colosseum. A spectacular stadium of spectacle where performances like dramatic theater, gladiator battles, and prisoner executions, among other things, took place across hundreds of years. But thanks to defunding and failed upkeep because, the empire's in crisis mode, events were a lot more rare in the Colosseum during these times. So you're probably good to just leave and... Oh, that's a big guy. You can tell by how big he is. Just look at those muscle veins, the chest hair. The menacing look. Terrifying. Let's see what he has to say.
Alios me provocare audit bellator.
I don't know what you just said.
O portet legere verba.
Oh yeah.
Pugna me bellator. Con prova divitato.
Okay.
Elige divitello.
All right. Let's advertise. Rule 1. The first strike is always precise. Rule 2. The second strike always finishes smooth.
Fabulous sunt vera. Its sentio omnino. Ineluctability. Ceres.
Well dang, those are some smooth moves you got there. That was a pretty decent fight with a pretty decent loot drop. But now we have to shift from fantasy to reality. The struggles of ancient Rome were very real. Disease, poverty, and constant war were a daily concern. Do you think you can handle a day-to-day life during one of the most difficult and dangerous times of the Roman Empire? Not like that you aren't. You have to remember that witch interrupted your spaghetti dinner, so you're gonna need to find some food. Traditionally, the Roman diet consisted of a variety of fruits, vegetables, grains, and meats, but you're in the middle of a crisis which includes agriculture. This means that food supply is on the fritz. Some farms have too little water, some farms have too much water. This is too much water! Even fewer have it just right, so food's getting a little scarce. Thanks to widespread civil wars across the empire, many regions have also had their trade routes disrupted, so what little food choices you have are restricted to your immediate area. This of course led to mass malnutrition across the empire, well, mainly for the poor anyway. Thankfully, the capital of the Roman Empire is able to provide some basic sustenance, for a price. So what's on the menu? As for vegetables, you have some choice of greens: parsley, peppers, cabbages and celery, asparagus and watercress and artichokes and lettuce, which is alright for just a quick bite, but you're a dude who needs better food to set you right. Maybe a fig, or maybe some dates, some apples or cherries or peaches or grapes? Breads for sure, there's some here to eat, just don't get your hopes up if you're looking for some meat. Weather and war have fucked up the supply, so these are pretty much all your choices, my guy. Beggars can't be choosers, but I beg you to choose. Survival is the game that you don't want to lose. And if you're looking for a drink to imbibe, have some watered down wine. You should also subscribe. Sorry, got lost on a rhyme scheme there. Anyway, time to make a purchase. Luckily, you have some gold from your previous altercation, and it's plenty to get you by for now, but it doesn't buy what it used to. See, the emperors, in all of their untold wisdom, needed money in the coffers to pay off incredible debts from beefing up the military and keeping peace with foreign entities. In order to do that, they chose to, among other things, devalue the currency by minting coins with lesser and lesser composition of precious metals. This inevitably caused rapid inflation, which is disturbing from both an economic and a fetish standpoint. Hey son, you watching more of them funny history videos? Go to your room. Since you have the cash monies, time to consume some nutrients. Problem is, you're an outsider, and unless you're fluent in the dead language of Latin, you're in a pickle, but you try to communicate with what little knowledge you have of the Latin language. Wingardium Leviosa? Well, that didn't work. You go up to the next vendor and instead just point to what you want. Why speak when your money can do the talking? Nimis pecunium. Yeah, thanks, you too. Alright, now you... Oh no. Your body isn't used to consuming all that ancient food. Looks like you need to go do some business. In a bit of a sweaty, stinky panic, you manage to find a public restroom. Ugh, it reeks in here. Don't these people have any sense of... Welcome to the Forica, also known as the community turlet. Several holes carved into long, cold marble slabs, perfect for slamming your ass on and expelling your evils. Usually hooked up to a public bath, excess bath water would run along the floor to flush away your densely digested duty poos to a public sewer system. If you were lucky enough to have it actually attached to one. Sure, you could be like them rich folk with their own private bathrooms, but you're not. So instead, you have to make bears with the bros, and you're gonna have to get real friendly cause as you may have observed, there's no toilet papyrus to speak of. No, instead, you're gonna have to ask Claudius here to share the community wiping tool. It's just a sea sponge on a stick. Once you've done cleaning your nethers, be sure to rinse it off in the shallow trough in front of you for the next guy. That's just common courtesy. Now, being a public bathroom and all, you could expect that these places were not the cleanest, and you'd be correct. Excessive buildup of waste not only led to widespread disease, but also dangerous levels of methane. Ugh, Claudius, light a match, dude. Let's try the bath instead. Public baths in the Roman Empire, called thermae, were actually pretty sweet. Available to anyone who wanted a nice refreshing dunk, these bathing complexes were a social gathering spot. They included exercise areas, steam rooms, and sometimes even libraries when you want to read a soggy book. Problem is, you're in a stagnant bath that doesn't get cleaned all that often, and hundreds of Romans use these baths every day, not to mention the fact that there isn't a bar of soap in sight. Romans didn't have soap. Instead, cleaning was done with this monstrosity. The strigil, a bronze tool used to scrape off the day's or week's grit and grime. Just be a little cautious when using it. In order to smell nice, Romans would apply scented olive oils all throughout their nooks and crannies. But now everyone's all slippery and oiled up, so watch your step. With all of that muck just soaking in the water, it's debatable how clean you actually got. Looks like all the Christians are moving in and telling everyone to cover up. What losers. Anyway, let's shimmy on down the road. Just keep your eyes to the skies for any other citizens who are emptying their festering chamber pots into the street. It's gonna be raining cats and logs. Oh yeah, you're definitely gonna be catching some sort of... I'm sure you won't be surprised to learn that an overcrowded and filthy city tends to be riddled with disease. Just look at modern LA. When it came to ancient Rome, the most common diseases were influenza and tuberculosis, as well as some STDs, but you're a good person who's waiting for marriage or proper emotional or monetary compensation before you explore that route, right? Right, so despite these common diseases, Rome would often be smacked in the face with various plagues. The term plague here meaning big bad unknown disease that killed a lot of people. They were plagues, just not the plague. This one is the Plague of Cyprian, named so after the Bishop Cyprian who wrote about the plague in fine detail, especially the symptoms. He wrote that the plague caused exhaustive diarrhea, a swollen and sore throat, constant vomiting, bloodshot eyes, loss of infected and putrefied limbs, paralysis, deafness, and blindness. All of these symptoms add up to one dead fella. Because of the bizarre symptoms, which don't point to any one known disease in particular, historians are still unsure what this plague actually was, but some suspect either the Ebola virus or smallpox. Regardless, the Plague of Cyprian devastated the Roman Empire. At its height, the plague was estimated to be killing off about 5,000 Romans a day. This crushed the Roman military, opening up opportunities for possible invasions, which of course would crush the Roman military even more. Local farms were abandoned, and since trade routes were still cut off due to internal clashes, famine became the new hot commodity. Entire cities saw rapid declines in population, the most notable being the city of Alexandria, Egypt. It sustained a 62% drop in population between the years of 249 and 262. This was caused by citizens either fleeing or dying, or both. So it looks like tons of people are leaving Rome. This can't be good. You're also down to your last few gold oh yeah, crime's a thing. Oh well, I'm sure that guy will get what's coming to him.
Stop!
Well, now you're just straight up out of money. Looks like you need to get a job. And you know what's hiring the most right now? The military. So you go up to a local guard and you ask him to join. I join as militum? Yeah, sure. Success! The guard gives you a quick once-over to make sure that you're cut out for the job. In order to join the ranks of the Roman military, you needed to meet some criteria. You must have been at least 5'7", between the ages of 17 and 23, and physically fit. Oh yeah, and a guy. Sorry ladies, you're not allowed to die for the Empire, just with it. Welcome to the military. Now, when you imagine a Roman soldier, you might think of this kind of a guy. This is a centurion, a highly trained and high-ranking commander, which is something that you'll never be. Instead, your aspiration should be lowered to that of a typical foot soldier. Sure, it's not as glorious, but these were the muscle of the Roman military. After months and months of rigorous and extremely taxing training, including combat and unit formation, you've been given the privilege of being javelin fodder for the Roman Empire. Here's your complimentary gear, generously provided by the taxpayers. Your primary weapon is your trusty gladius, a 24-inch steel short sword. Your secondary is your pugio, a wide flat-bladed dagger for when you want to remind your enemies of personal space. You're also given a pilum, a pretty sweet javelin, and it does this. Pretty neat, huh? It was kind of designed to be a one-and-done type weapon, used to pierce enemy armor or get stuck in their shields, rendering them useless. Typically, a pilum weighed about 2 to 5 pounds, so they were pretty easy to lob at the enemy. As for armor, foot soldiers in the 3rd century typically wore lorica hamata, a bronze and iron chainmail shirt which offered great protection against slashes and cuts, just not so much against the stabbing. In addition, you were given a scutum, a large wooden round shield for protection against projectiles impairing the enemy so you can scoot them back. You also have to protect your dome, so make sure you grab a helmet. In addition to protecting your melon, these also protected the back of your neck as well as your precious cheeks with tieable cheek guards. Now, you're ready to fight. Time to head west to the front lines. Since it's the year 250, the Roman Empire faces a terrifying foe. The Goths. Truly barbaric people that have the gall to invade the Roman Empire. For the sake of brevity, they hate you because they ain't you, so their goal is to take everything you have, just as long as they're back in time for their moms to pick them up from the mall. You spot one of their many headquarters in the distance, but you'll never break through their front line, unless you're able to build up enough speed, but how? There! Can you do this? Yes, you have to. For the Empire. You carefully position yourself, you turn around, and... Oops, wrong angle. Just say when's, Evil kings doing evil things. Hey, he wasn't a king. Yeah, you're right. While some of the guys on this list weren't kings by title, they held very high positions of power nonetheless. So, to you I say, moving on. Emperor Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, or just Nero to his friends and enemies, was the very last Roman emperor of the less than impressive Julio-Claudian dynasty, which lasted from 27 BC to 68 AD. Like any complete psycho, Nero had a pretty complicated childhood. When Nero was just a wee Nerite at the age of 3, his daddy went and abandoned the family by dying. Mom got exiled to a tiny island for maybe attempting to kill Emperor Caligula. Caligula got killed anyway. Mom is unexiled and marries the new emperor, Claudius, which happens to be her uncle, by the way. The public is all, ugh. And now little Nero has a great uncle emperor dad who has proclaimed him to be the new heir to the throne. I love you, Uncle Daddy. That's a lot to deal with as a child, but the sweet birthday presents help you quickly forget. So why did this happen? Because Nero's mom, Agrippina, was a political savage. Her only interest was power. So much so that, to prevent a revenge plot, she had the recently stabbed Emperor Caligula's widow accused of black magic, banished, and even convinced her to fully deplete her own health bar. Now, she wants her baby boy Nero to be emperor, and in 54 AD, that's what happened. Emperor Claudius died under mysterious circumstances. Mysterious in the sense of having a potentially poisonous mushroom just absolutely slam down his gullet by Agrippina herself. Maybe. But since the board game Clue had yet to be invented, forensic puzzle solving was pretty minimal. Oh my god! Put that knife down, someone's just been murdered! Coincidentally, Nero's stepbrother, Britannicus, who had claim to the throne, also decided to expire around the same time under mysterious circumstances. So now, at just 16 years old, Nero is emperor.
Yes! Yes!
So how did he do being emperor? He actually started off pretty well. He banned capital punishment, expanded the arts, gave disaster relief aid to neighboring cities, reduced taxes, and even gave some rights to slaves. Seems like a pretty nice guy, actually. Uh-oh, this is getting clickbaity. We're already 2 minutes in, where's all the evil stuff? Well, for one, he married his stepsister as a power move, which is gross, but not evil. Since the relationship was void of any real love, Nero started poking around in other women's hoo-has, one of which was Poppaea Sabina, a local town babe who was already married. Well, Nero pops Poppaea and puts a baby in her belly. This little stunt ticked off his mom, who was trying to maximize power through having a mentally stable emperor's son. Since Nero didn't think that his mom's attitude was very cash money of her, he had her assassinated, but made it look like an accident. This is regarded as the turning point in Nero's reign, and when all the ancient shit started to hit the ancient fan. He began going a bit kill happy. Next, he divorced his stepsister, had her exiled, killed, and took her head as a trophy, apparently under Poppaea's influence. But not to worry, Nero did a 360, turned around, and forward smashed Poppaea and their unborn child off stage. That's one problem taken care of. Nero went unhinged. He had several close friends and political rivals murdered, had a former slave castrated, then married him, and even had a senator murdered just because his expressions were too boring. Oh, would you look at that? I'm dying now. Okay. But Nero's crowning moment in history comes in the year 64, where he allegedly started a small fire in a suspiciously flammable merchant shop. According to some sources, Nero wanted to make way for a newer, more elegant and ornate palace. And you know what they say, in order to make an omelet, you have to burn down your city. About 71% of Rome was destroyed in the Great Fire in 64 AD. There's rumors that Nero shredded on the fiddle or lute during all this, but there's no actual proof of that claim. But like, could you imagine? Eventually, Nero's frequent and dangerously wacky antics forced the Senate to declare him a public enemy. But Nero said that he wouldn't be taken alive. And he wasn't. He went from 0 to 0 by slamming a knife into his own neck, thus ending his 13-year reign. Talk about a near-death experience. You may not think it by looking at him, but this tall glass of lukewarm pond water was once the most influential and feared kings in Europe in the late 1400s. This is Ferdinand I of Naples, aka Ferrante. He was the illegitimate son of King Alfonso the Magnanimous of Aragon. Not Aragorn. Aragon is over in Spain. Naples is over in Italy. Geography. When Alfonso left this mortal coil, Ferdinand inherited the crown at Naples at the age of 35. Now listen, if you're gonna control a kingdom, seldom do kind kings succeed. Though he did bring about 20 years of peace and prosperity to his own kingdom, he was cruel and vile to his enemies, which, makes sense. You can't conquer with forgiveness and love, you would just get conquered yourself. That being the case, Ferdinand got a reputation for being rather ruthless. Basically, if you crossed the guy or got on his bad side, you were marked for an unpleasant death. An example of this was early on in his reign in 1462 when several nobles led a revolt against him, trying to put some ham-hock of a human on the throne instead. But Ferdinand put a swift end to that gaggle of rabble-rousers and the nobles were put in the corner. After many years of keeping his enemies in check, the Ottoman Empire decided it was time to do Ottoman Empire things and invaded Naples in 1480. The southeast region of Salento fell to the Furniture Empire after a few weeks. This caused Ferdinand to panic and declare that everyone should be all hands on deck to fill the kingdom's coffers to fight back the invading Ottomans, and were eventually successful. But the heavy tax burdens pissed off the no-good, unthankful nobles. They led yet another rebellion against Ferdinand, to which he said, okay, and seized their property and wealth. The nobles gave up yet again, but Ferdinand wanted to put an end to this once and for all. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, you're fucking dead. So Ferdinand set up a meeting to grant the rebels amnesty and forgiveness. At said meeting, a deal was struck and the rebels were quickly forgiven, and also quickly murdered. As a warning to any future conspirators, King Ferdinand had their bodies mummified, stuffed, dressed, and put on display in what he called his Black Museum. Listen here, Ferdinand, I think some things need to change around here. Oh, really? Whew, you're doing such a good job as king. Excuse me while I go and unshit my pants. Ferdinand eventually died of butthole cancer, and Naples fell to the French soon after. Now the title lame here isn't what you think it is. Instead of being lame like some dumb nerd, Timur was lame in the sense of being disabled. While committing casual sheep theft, as children do, young Timur took an arrow to the knee and an arrow to the hand, which caused lifelong injury. But do you think being reduced down to the usefulness of a cup of tapioca pudding is going to stop this future conquering warlord? Definitely not. In fact, little Timur grew up to be an extremely cruel but highly intelligent and effective military tactician. Through his efforts, the Turco-Mongol warlord conquered most of Western and Central Asia, Caucasia, Persia, the Middle East, and parts of South Asia and Eastern Europe by 1404, all while forming an empire to call his own, the Timurid Empire. Not bad for running on a 50% limb deficit. During his conquests, he spread destruction and terror almost everywhere he went, because that's kind of what conquerors do. Remember, real power is taken, not given. Throughout these campaigns, Timur's actions gained him quite an infamous reputation, placing him amongst other horrifying legends. One such action was the massacre of Isfahan. Formerly a Persian city, Isfahan was a flourishing hub of art, medicine, music, philosophy, and architecture, which meant it had wealth. A thriving city is great and all, but when you have no army to defend it, you're basically just begging for a pillaging. Oh no, I hope no one takes my hard-earned money. Ugh, my coins are just spilling out. Please don't plunder me pockets. Is this a sexual thing? It could be. So with little to no defense in place, Timur waltzed right in and was all, this is mine now. And Isfahan was all, fair enough, surrendering immediately. As an act of mercy, Timur spared the population, did some light looting, and left some soldiers in command as he went on his next conquest. Well, a few young hooligans decided to be heroes and murdered Timur's soldiers. Bad move. Timur caught wind of this and immediately hightailed it back to Isfahan. In a completely level-headed and reasonable response, he ordered the slaughter of every man, woman, and child in the city. He gave each of his soldiers a quota of heads to bring him. If they failed to collect the craniums, they would lose their own noggins to add to the count. One by one, each citizen was cut down. Almost the entire population of 100,000 people, including all livestock, were murdered. Piles of skulls were scattered around the city as testaments to the horrific act. Look, taking your revenge against those who directly defied you is one thing, but when tens of thousands of innocent civilians become collateral damage to your blind wrath, that's when things cross over into evil territory. One surviving prisoner stated that Timur, quote, ordered the women and children to be taken to a plain outside the city, and ordered the children under 7 years of age to be placed apart, and ordered his people to ride over these same children. When his counselors and the mothers of the children saw this, they fell at his feet and begged that he would not kill them. He would not listen, and ordered that they should be ridden over. But none would be the first to do so. He got angry and rode himself among them and said, "Now I should like to see, who will not ride after me?" Then they were obliged to ride over the children, and they were all trampled upon. There were 7,000. Yeah, Timur was a pretty bad dude, and that's really just one example of his many atrocities. By the time of his death in 1405, it is estimated that Timur's conquests caused the death of over 17 million people, which was about 5% of the world's population at the time. Pretty solid kill streak. The Xia dynasty, the very first dynasty in ancient China, is estimated to have been founded around 2070 BC and remained in power for several hundreds of years, until this guy showed up. King Jie was the last ruler of the Xia dynasty, which most certainly means that he royally fudged up in some shape or form. So what happened? Not surprisingly, Jie had a reputation as a cruel tyrant. He was the big cheese around these parts, and he wanted everyone to know that at all times. But you could argue that Jie was ahead of his time, because instead of focusing on ways to better his empire, like any good emperor would, he only sought ways to make life better for himself and his closest buddies, like modern politicians. He also loved spending money. Tons of it. He would drain the kingdom's coffers on frivolous activities like luxurious palace upgrades, endless entertainment, and smashing some gash with the royal concubines. When he ran out of money, he would either raise taxes to continue to fund his lifestyle, or randomly invade small neighboring towns to relieve them of their hard-earned money and their women. On one particularly lucrative expedition, Jie decided to ravage the local Yushi clan. Open up, Yushi, I know you're in there. Oh, sorry. Wrong clan. There we go. The Yushi clan didn't want to put up a fight because they knew they would get their shit kicked in, so they instantly surrendered. As you can see, they were pretty smart. The clan offered up a substantial bounty of riches for King Jie to hit the road. But since the king had a boner for spilling blood, he felt flaccid and defeated by an enemy who quickly gave up without a fight. Before King Jie could act, the chief of the Yushi clan offered one more prize, a beautiful woman by the name of Moshi. Enamored by her obvious beauty, King Jie swiftly accepted the offer. "I love you." Jie became unhealthily obsessed with Moshi, trying anything and everything to please her. He once had servants dig a lake and fill it with wine so the couple could bathe, drink, and flop around on and in each other. I mean, the lake was just full of completely disgusting fluids. Now that it was properly flavored, 3,000 men were then commanded to drink the lake dry. They drowned. After learning that his nearest, dearest, darlingest love weirdly enjoyed the ASMR pleasures of tearing silk, he demanded that the finest silks from the farthest reaches of the kingdom be brought before him so he could rip them for her. All of these dumbass endeavors continued to clear out the kingdom's already scant reserves, so it was time to fundraise. Okay fellas, taxes are going up again. What the fuck, Jie? We can't afford to live like this. You don't understand, I'm this close to getting her to notice me. Stop being a simp. Alright, that guy, someone kill that guy. You're still a simp, you know. I know. Basically, over the next several years, all the pissed off and neglected subjects and neighbors started feeling pissed off and neglected, so they turned their attention to a newer, cooler guy. Instead of Jie of Xia, now they wanted Tang of Shang. How funny is that? After many years of gaining political power and support around the country, Tang of Shang built an army, revolted, and eventually defeated and captured King Jie, stripping him of his kingship. Around 1600 BC, the Xia dynasty had fallen after about 500 years of rule. Jie eventually died of natural causes as a penniless commoner. Evil can be subjective. What could be viewed as an act of evil by one group may be celebrated and revered by another. For instance, Vlad the Impaler's cruel acts of, well, impaling 20,000 people may be seen as wicked and sadistic by most, but to Romanians, he's seen as a hero because he defended his homeland from the invading Ottoman Empire. But then there's just completely unjustifiable evil assholes, like King Leopold II of Belgium. What do you think of when you think of Belgium? Waffles? Chocolate? Well, how about indigenous genocide? Yeah, in case you didn't know, the Belgian crown was once in possession of one of, if not the, bloodiest European colonies in African history. At the Berlin Conference in 1884, King Leopold II sought to expand his fortune by staking claim to the Congo, over 900,000 square miles of African rainforest in the present-day Democratic Republic of the Congo. To sweeten the deal, Leo formed the International African Association under the guise that it was for humanitarian and philanthropic purposes. Also to establish free trade between the European countries, which was the real selling point. With that, the other colonizing European countries of France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and the United Kingdom welcomed Belgium's claim to the land, and King Leopold II was now the sole owner of the ironically named Congo Free State. But there was nothing free about it. King Leo's only interest was to extract as much resources and wealth from the land by any means necessary. In order to do that, he needed manpower. So he forced new laws on the Congolese chieftains to implement within their own communities. Those who resisted were swiftly eradicated by other Congolese communities who were backed by the Belgian crown. Initial collection and trade of precious ivory exports weren't the best for profit margins, so not as much money was being made as expected, causing the colony to fall into massive debt. But with the invention and development of automobiles in the late 1800s, the demand for tires shot through the thatched roof. In order to make tires, you need rubber. Lots of rubber. Where does rubber come from? Rubber trees. And boy, let me tell you that the Congo had some rubber trees. After establishing his own personal African army called the Force Publique to enforce rule, King Leo extracted a fortune through blood. Millions of Congolese natives were enslaved and forced to harvest and process rubber from the Congo with the main goal of maximizing production at all costs. Those who were unable to meet a labor quota were sometimes murdered on the spot. Those who refused to work were savagely beaten with their villages raided and destroyed. This system, called the Red Rubber System, led to the utter collapse of the Congolese economy and culture. It should be noted that King Leo never stepped foot in the Congo himself. He left all of his dirty work to hand-picked Belgian officials who ruled as they pleased, often contributing their own atrocities against the native people. One particularly nasty official was Léon Fièvez. He was notorious for punishing underperforming slaves by having their hands cut off. He claimed that it was a way to settle the debt of labor owed to him. The Force Publique soldiers were in charge of collecting these debts, and they were even rewarded for the amount of hands they could collect. With that mentality, they would often resort to cutting the hands off of working slaves to cheat the system. This actually ended up pissing the king off because how the hell are slaves supposed to work with no hands? There were several other issues that plagued the Congo as a direct result of Belgian brutality. All of the development and forced labor caused the vast majority of farming to come to a dead halt, leading to extreme famine and even more deaths. Children who were orphaned during the colonization were kidnapped and forced into Catholic schools where they would learn to work or be soldiers. Fatal diseases ran rampant through the Congo, including smallpox, amoebic dysentery, and the parasitic trypanosomiasis, also called the sleeping sickness, which caused mass insomnia and painful muscle spasms. Through the culmination of these atrocities, historians estimate that roughly 5 to 10 million Congolese people lost their lives during Belgium's reign over the Congo from 1885 to 1908. Thanks to missionaries who secretly documented these atrocities, the public was informed of the horrors of the Congo. The Belgian public, who had no knowledge of these actions, caused an uproar. After much public outcry around the world, including famous writers like Mark Twain and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the Belgian parliament forced King Leopold II to cede the Congo Free State to Belgium itself in 1908, but not before he could destroy any and all documented evidence of his wrongdoings that he could find. The Congo Free State was changed to the Belgian Congo, then the Republic of the Congo, then the Democratic Republic of the Congo, since its western neighbor had the same name. King Leopold died a year later in 1909, and the public dunked on his funeral with loud booing and heckling. Even today, many Belgians are ashamed of their late monarch's atrocious behavior and demonstration of how evil a human could be.